So I will be speaking in Turkish first, and I will explain everything in English. Herkese iyi akşamlar. Öncelikle bu kadar özel bir günde zaman ayırıp katıldığınız için programa çok teşekkür ederim. Daha dışarıdan gelenler için öncelikle yine tekrar kendimi tanıtarak başlamak istiyorum. Ben doktor öğretim üyesi Özge Özel. Burdur Mehmet Akif Ersoy Üniversitesi Okul Öncesi Eğitim Anabilim Dalı'nda görev yapıyorum. Bu dönem yürütmekte olduğum farklı ülkelerde erken çocukluk eğitimi için bir projeye başladık ve her hafta farklı ülkelerden konuklar davet edip o ülkenin okul öncesi eğitimiyle ilgili konuşuyorduk. Yani katılımcımız bize bilgiler veriyordu. Bu hafta farklı bir şey yapalım dedik. Eduardo, Rolland, Jordan'da yani Ürdün'de UNICEF'te görev yapıyor. Kendisi okul öncesi eğitim uzmanı ve bize erken çocuklukta beyin gelişimiyle ilgili bilgiler verecek. Süreçte çok biraz uzun bir sunum olduğu için öncelikle altyazılı bir şekilde sunumunu izleyeceğiz ve sormak istediğiniz sorular varsa bunları Eduardo'ya iletebileceğiz. Onun haricinde sizin yine sunumla ilgili sorularınız olursa yazarak iletebilirsiniz. Good evening everyone. My name is Özge Özel. I'm the assistant professor at Mehmet Akif Ersoy University. This semester I've been teaching a class called Early Childhood Education in different countries. And each week we have a guest speaker from that country. This week we have different thing. We have a guest speaker from Jordan, UNICEF. Eduardo Rolland is the early childhood education specialist, and he will be talking about the early childhood brain development. We will be seeing his presentation with the subtitle, and then we are gonna do question and answer. If you are ready, we can start your presentation.
Hi everyone, my name is Eduardo and I work as an education specialist in Jordan with UNICEF. Thank you very much, Dr. Özge, for inviting me to do this presentation. I'm going to do the presentation in English. It will be subtitled, and then we'll have a session on questions and answers. Unfortunately, I don't speak Turkish, so I have to apologize to all of you, but hopefully with the translation and with Dr. Özge facilitation, we can have as many questions and as interactive as possible. I will try to do my presentation quite short, so we have time to real interaction between all of us. Okay, let me share my presentation with you all, and we will move from there. Yeah. Özge, can you see the?
Yes.
Okay, terrific. Let me do it this way then. So what today I wanted to have a little conversation, and hopefully, as I explained to you, to have it as interactive as possible.
Arkadaşlar sorunsuz bir şekilde hem sesli hem de yazıları görebiliyorsunuzdur umarım. Var mı herhangi bir problem? Yok sanıyorum. Devam ediyorum.
What I'm going to give you is basically hundreds of years of research on the human development and different sciences such as neuroscience, education, sociology, psychodevelopment, and giving to you everything, hundreds of years in a short presentation of 20 minutes. So I'm going to do almost an impossible, I have an impossible task in front of me on how to apply all this research. And I'm going to do it even more concise and giving you just 4 simple messages that explains why it's so fundamental that we pay attention to the very early years of life. So all sum up in just 4 messages. What we know is that the life is a continuum from the moment we are conceived to all our life, during all our life course. But that there are moments that are quite essential on the construction of us as human beings. And I would say those very important moments are from the preconception to birth, from birth, when we are born with around 100 billion neurons in our body, from birth to age of 3. So those 2-3. So those really, some people talk about the first 1,000 days of life, in which the human being develops the maximum synaptical connectivity. Sorry for being a bit technical there, but basically where it happens, the maximum connectivity of the brain that is created by the interaction with the environment, by the communication with our parents, with our caregivers, with the daycare centers that we are in, or those very early years of life. By the age of 3, we are going to have in our brain the maximum connectivity of the brain. In fact, it is 10 times the whole connectivity of the whole internet at this moment in the world. And then from around the year 3 to when we enter preschool, and there is a moment that is very interesting, because what it happens is there is a reduction of the numbers of connections of the brain. There is a lot of what we call pruning, which is the brain becomes much more selective and specialized. By the time we enter primary school, a lot of the trends of our personality, our bases and fundamental and foundations to learn are already set up. I am not a determinist. I'm not going to say that everything is determined by the age of 6, but a lot of what we are is going to be already shaped by the time we enter in preschool. My 4 messages of early childhood development, or early childhood education. The first message is very simple, and I think about that. And it's that DNA is not our destiny. In fact, the DNA can be altered by the environment in which we are born and how we interact with others. But what we know is that the genetic information we are born with is going to be very much shaped in the very early years of life because of the environments where we are going to develop. Obviously, the most important relation in our life is going to be with our primary caregivers, with the people who we are going to develop a bond with. And when I say an attachment, I'm not talking about an email attachment. Obviously, it is a little bit much more technical than that. We are human beings, are mammals, and mammals, to be able to develop, they need a very close interaction, a social interaction with few people that are going to have total trust with. Usually are the parents. It could be the mother or the father. It could be also an adult figure or several adult figures like siblings or grandparents, for example, that are going to be the main interaction that is going to make possible the brain to develop. So we are born with an amount of genetical capacities and possibilities that are going to be, but they are not our destiny. We are not just, it's not that simple as that. It's going to develop according with the possibilities that the environment that is around us are going to allow us. And I will say, and this is going to sound a little bit kitsch or silly, but I will say the ingredient that is going to help the brain the neurons in the brain to increase the connectivity is going to be affection, is going to be love, is going to be physical contact, is going to be those interactions, those cues that that we give to the young kid. In fact, the later research says that every second in the life of a baby and a toddler, the number of the connections in the brain can increase. The new connections can be from 750 to 1 million new connections per second in the life of a kid, of a baby or of a toddler, which is absolutely incredible, and it will never happen again in the rest of the life of a human being. I want to show you a little video. Let's see how this works, of how that connectivity in the brain on the early years work. Let's see if this is going to work. It's a very simple video that will help you. And Dr. Oscar, if you tell me if that you can see it.
For showing a video, you should stop sharing screen, and then okay. you need to share screen again with the video.
Okay, let's do that. I can see that. Terrific.
Perfect. I'm seeing right now.
Now you see us. Okay. Let's.
I can't hear you. It's very slow. Could you please volume up?
During this important period of brain development, billions of brain cells called neurons send electrical signals to communicate with each other. These connections form circuits that become the basic foundation of brain architecture. Circuits and connections proliferate at a rapid pace and are reinforced through repeated use. Our experiences and environment dictate which circuits and connections get more use. Connections that are used more grow stronger and more permanent. Meanwhile, connections that are used less fade away through a normal process called pruning. Well-used circuits create lightning-fast pathways for neural signals to travel across regions of the brain. Simple circuits form first, providing a foundation for more complex circuits to build on later. Through this process, neurons form strong circuits and connections for emotions, motor skills, behavioral control, logic, language, and memory during the early critical period of development. With repeated use, these circuits become more efficient and connect to other areas of the brain more rapidly. While they originate in specific areas of the brain, the circuits are interconnected. You can't have one type of skill without the others to support it. Like building a house, everything is connected, and what comes first forms a foundation for all that comes later.
Okay. Yeah, was the volume okay? Otherwise, this is going to be subtitled, right, for your
yes. Mm-hmm.
Your participants. So let me show you here in this slide how it works in the brain. When during gestation, when you are in your mommy's belly, the neurons are formed, and they are formed at around 350,000 from the month 3, I think it is, around 350,000 new neurons every minute. So when we are born with around, as I said, it's around like 100. Usually we said 100 billion neurons in our body, but they are not very much interconnected. So the connectivity of the synapses of the neurons in the brain starts accelerating thanks to the interaction with the external world, through the talking to the parents, through the contact, through those little interactions with the baby. And it accelerates in an amazing way until the year 2, the year 3, which the connection of those 100 billion neurons are at its maximum connectivity. From year 2, year 3, the connection started reducing, not because the children are becoming less smart or less intelligent or something of that sort, but something much more subtle than that, which it becomes is the brain becomes much more specialized. And from 10 times the connectivity of the whole internet in the brain of a baby goes down to around 3 times the whole connectivity of the internet in just one brain, which is more or less the connectivity that we maintain when we become adults. The second message I have for you is that the interventions are better. The sooner the better. It's better to intervene with younger kids. It's better to develop the brain soon. The reason why is because there is a window of opportunity that will never present back in our lives. There's a window of opportunity in the early years of life that is unique, because the need of let's put it this way, the need of energy to learn is so much smaller. The capacity of the brain to absorb, to retain, to discover, to develop will never be at the same level as it is during the early years of life. I am showing you this slide, which is a bit sad. In this slide, you have 2 brains, and these scanners of the brain, these are real brains, show the connectivity in the brain. In the one on the right, if you see, there is not much red color. The red color shows maximum connectivity, maximum activity of the brain, right? The one on the left side, I will say, is a healthy brain. It's a brain. These are 2 kids of the same age, and more or less the same age. The one in the left, there is a lot of red, right? You can see a lot of red. That means that is a very active brain. That is a brain that has been well taken care of, meaning it's a brain that has been stimulated, that has grown up in an environment where there was stimulation for the brain to develop. While on the right side is actually a child that was subjected to institutionalization. It's a kid who was in an orphanage, and that was in an orphanage in very early years of life. So institutionalization is the worst thing that can happen to a brain when a child is not taken care of by the same caregiver in a long term, that is not being continuously stimulated. Children need continuous stimulation. The fact is that if a brain is not developed in the early years, it will be very difficult to stimulate and to make the foundation of that brain to work well. The right side brain with not that much red color basically represents neglect. A child that has been abused or neglected, that has not been stimulated. Children who are not stimulated, who are not cared for, who are not loved in the very early years of life will present that type of brain with not much connectivity, but particularly in the frontal cortex of the brain, which is basically your front, your forehead, which it's the most developed area of the brain. But it will have a lot of connectivity in the cerebellum, in the area which shows basically stress responses that are activated by neglect, by abuse, by violence. I like to show you also the same idea that the earlier the better. The earlier we work with children, the more effective we will be. Let me show you this slide that shows the plasticity of the brain. What does it mean, the plasticity of the brain? What it means is that the brain has a plasticity in the very first years of life that will never be repeated later on, because it basically means that you have to, the effort that you have to invest in learning and connecting the brain is smaller the younger the child is. You can always learn in your life. You can alter the brain. You can actually, and I'm not going to talk today much about epigenetics, but through interaction with environment, you can actually make the brain much smarter and agile and active. But the older you are, the more effort you have to invest to make any change in the brain. My third message is about the stress. Let me share with you this concept. It's a little bit artificial, I confess, but there are three types of stress. There is a very healthy stress, a positive stress. When your boss said you have a deadline, you have to do your work by Friday, you have to do a presentation or finish an exam or doing something like that by Friday. Well, sometimes that is helpful. It's stressful, but it's exciting. It motivates you. It changes the chemical structure of your brain. When you have a stress, you have the hormones of stress, cortisol, and that is basically activated in the brain. It might raise your heart rate. It might make you nervous, and that can be positive when it is from time to time. There is also a tolerable stress that is not necessarily positive, but your brain and your body can cope with. For example, for children, the situation of entering in preschool, entering in kindergarten, or in a daycare, or in primary school, it's a very, very stressful situation. It really challenges and pushes them. But if it is done correctly, it's something that children cope with no major problem. Some kids may cry, may feel separation anxiety from their parents, for example, when they enter in kindergarten. But if the kindergarten is a good environment, or the primary school is a good environment, the kid will overcome that tolerable stress, and actually it will also, could be even positive, right? But there is a very important one, the third type of stress, which is toxic stress. Toxic stress, there are two types of toxic stress. Prolonged activation of the stress response system. When a baby particularly, doesn't have protective relationships, when it is subjected to continuous neglect or abuse, when the stress response of the brain is constant, which means is that if you connect the stress response, you disconnect other areas of the brain that are necessary for development. A child that is neglected or abused continuously or frequently will be always in a mood of fight or self-defense that will inhibit other areas of the brain that needs to be developed. So the child might end up having a very connected stress responses in the brain, a very aggressive, it will become a very aggressive child, a very aggressive personality, a very defensive, a very not sympathetic, not empathetic personality that is basically ready to fight and flight, or instead of someone who can develop areas of the brain that are more reflexive, that are more the cognitive areas of the brain. Toxic stress is basically what creates a lot of problems in the future of a child as a human being. There is a lot of studies that connect toxic stress, neglect and abuse in the early years of life with poor outcomes in life, poor educational outcomes, poor economic outcomes, poor social outcomes, a lot of accessibilities and problems later in life. I am going to show you just one more video, if you allow me. It's going to be on an experiment that is going to help you see almost like inside the brain of a child. Some people will think that, it doesn't matter if a child cries a little bit or suffers a little bit, because we are so resilient. But the early years of life are very subtle. and fragile. I forgot to mention the other type of toxic stress, which can be not prolonged in time, but very, very dramatic. Like, for example, when a child loses a parent or is subjected to a traumatic event of violence. Anyways, let me show you this experiment, which will, if you follow the experiment, and I'm sure all the participants of this seminar are going to be very empathetic, they will feel the pain of a child that is not being stimulated, that is not being taken care of. Let me stop the sharing here, and then I am going to go here. This video. Okay. Now share the screen.
Babies this young scream to emotions. This is something that we started studying years ago. Didn't believe that it could engage in social interaction, and it still faces her. She sits down, she's laying, and she gives a greeting to the baby, the baby gives a greeting back to her. This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, others trying to engage. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions. That's really. Then we, as the mother, to knock this baby. Baby very excellent. Then she uses all of her abilities to try and get them. She smiles at them. She baby puts both hands up in front of her, says, "What's happening?" She makes that screechy sound. And the mother, like, come on, why are we doing this? Even in this 2 minutes when they don't get normal, they react with negative emotions. They turn away. They feel the stress of it. They actually lose control of the possible stress. Good is that normal stuff that goes on. Bad is when something bad happens, but the end you can overcome it. Stop this little face. Play it. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to there's no reparation. We're stuck.
Yeah. Oscar?
Yes, I'm hearing you. I'm typing.
Yeah.
I'm writing my questions.
Okay, I'm going to continue with the presentation, but I think for me this this video represent the essence of what I want to share with you. Unfortunately, the doctor who is talking in that video is a very optimistic person, and he talks about normalcy as if every child receives the attention and the affection that she or he deserves.
Mhm.
We need to be aware that that is often not the case, and that children are often left neglected or abused or not taken care of, which creates damage, creates real damage in the brain that in some cases can be even irreparable, that you cannot repair, you cannot bring back. I'm talking to you from Jordan, where we have 3 million refugees, from Palestinians to the different waves of Iraqis, obviously hundreds of thousands of Syrians. We have also Yemenis, some of them coming from the recent wars in Yemen or in Sudan. In those households, it's very easy to think that there are problems of stress that are going to affect the capacity of the parents themselves, or also the teachers and the caretakers to take care, to pay the attention that the children deserve and need to develop healthy brains. And that is going to have a huge impact on the life of those children forever. I'm sure you deal with the same problems also in Turkey. I am aware that you also have hundreds of thousands of refugees.
Over 5 million.
Over 5 million. And yeah, you also have a huge country, but it also, even not thinking about refugees, you can think about also of the slums or areas where there are children that live in households where there is no enough stimulation, where there is a lot of stress in their families because they don't have job, or they have economic problems, or they have family problems, etc., etc. Those have impacts that perpetuate in history, and almost is a cycle of a risk for a cycle of underdeveloped or unhealthy brains. I will say, yes, my last point, now that I explained to you a little bit of how the brain works, what is a healthy development of the brain, how important is to have interactions with the child, a continuous interaction in the child that is going to make possible this between 750 to 1 million new connections in the brain of a child, of a baby or of a toddler in the early years of life. And also which are the risks of not having those interactions. The need for those environments that are conducive to learning, conducive to healthy development are very complex. You probably, as professionals on early childhood development, are going to have influence in some of the areas of the environment of the child. But we need to understand that we have to work together as a society to create those environments. Children need to have early education from the very early years of life. Waiting until primary school is in many cases too late. It's never too late if it's a good purpose, but it is, in a way, it is to learn because it is much easier to start educating children earlier through play. Play-based education will stimulate all these interconnections. But it's not only about education, it is also about the protection in their families and in their communities, the connection that particularly parents and close attachments to the children will help to develop. And other things that are very important, for example, health and nutrition. We know that in the 3 first years of life, 80% of all the nutrients that a child ingests, all the nutrients, the good elements of the food that a baby takes, goes to nourish only one organ in the body, which is the brain. The brain needs a huge amounts of energy, basically, to create all these connections. So poor diets are a real drag for healthy development of the brain. And probably more importantly is stimulation and care from the families, and also protection. Children who live in households that are where they suffer neglect or abuse, where they witness violence. Witnessing violence, some people will think, and this is very common, that children, it doesn't matter if you scream in front of a child, because they will forget, they will not remember the violence that had been witnessed. That a child could witness, but in fact is the opposite. The impact of witnessing violence, or witnessing not only being subjected or victim to violence or neglect, but to witness those those acts create enormous amounts of stress that leave a real imprint in the brain, that really have nefarious consequences to the development of the brain. So we need early childhood development, as you well know, is a little bit of all the areas combined to create these environments around the child, particularly education, protection, health, nutrition, and care and stimulation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to leave it there. We can, because I think this is the base, and then we can interact with some questions. And Dr. Oscar, maybe you.
Evet, umarım faydalı olmuştur sizin için sunum ve sorunsuz cevap yazıları okuyabilmişsinizdir umarım. Şimdi sorularınız varsa sorularınızı alayım. Geçelim. I'm asking if they have any question. Ya da beyin gelişimiyle ilgili eklemek istediğiniz herhangi bir şey varsa.
Thanks, Dr. Oscar. I'm checking in the chat, but I think it's all written in Turkish. No, there's not. There is someone writing there in English now. But I'm happy to answer any question. I think it's a bit difficult also to assimilate something pre-registered. But I will be happy to have that in the connection and question and answer and being as more interactive as possible.
Yes. Sorunuz varsa cevaplamaktan mutluluk duyacağım. Yani ne kadar çok etkileşim içerisinde olursak o kadar iyi dedi. Var mı sorusu olan? Rica ederim. Verim alabildiyseniz ne güzel. One of my students is asking if there is any activity that reinforce children's brain development.
Any activity? Oh my God, there are all the activities reinforce children development. Mm-hmm. The idea is which kind of development you are looking for. Because I will tell you, in fact, if you neglect or you abuse a child, mm-hmm. you are also developing parts of the brain. Mm-hmm. You are developing and reinforcing. You are making it stronger the stress response of the brain. But the point is which kind of development you want for the child. So yes, of course, all the activity, all the environment is going to develop the brain, but it is going to develop the brain in which way? Mm-hmm. So I'm sure that I don't know which student asked you for that one. Which was the name of the student who asked that question? Seda. I don't know what's your profile. Do you work like in a you want to work in a nursery? You want to work in a classroom? Or maybe you are asking that question because you have a child and you are thinking, which kind of activities do I have to do with my child to?
Let me ask her. Öncelikle şöyle, Seda'nın sorusunu ilettim. Beyin gelişimini olumlu yönde etkileyen belirli bir aktivite var mı diye. Eduardo da diyor ki yani yaptığınız bütün aktiviteler ya da kurduğunuz bütün iletişimler aslında beyni etkiler. Hatta bazen az önce bahsettiği pozitif stres dediğimiz durumlarda bile beyin gelişimini bir şekilde geliştirmiş olursunuz. Aslında burada önemli olan hangi yönden beyin gelişimini geliştirmek istiyorsunuz. O önemli. Spesifik bir şey söylemek için ama yaptığınız bütün aktiviteler aslında bunu etkiler, geliştirir diyor Eduardo. Bu arada Sedancığım şeyi sordu, hani bunu bir yerde çalışırken, örneğin hani kreşlerde, ana sınıflarında çalışırken hani kullanmak için mi soruyorsun yoksa kendi çocukların var da onların gelişimleri için mi soruyorsun diye de iletmemi istedi. So I have a professor at my university. She's asking a question. She's asking one point I wonder is actually about Jordan. Could you give me some information about early childhood education in Jordan?
Yeah. Do you want me to? Oh, that's a very open question. So about education in particular, so Jordan has, as I said before, a huge population of refugees in the country, and that obviously determines a lot the policies of the country. But interestingly enough, in Jordan, the first early childhood development policy was agreed upon in 2000, in the year 2000. And since then, there have been two action plans for developing, for improving early childhood development in the country. So it's a national objective. It's a national priority.
Let me translate first, then we can continue.
Yes.
Okay. Aylin hocamız özellikle Ürdün'deki okul öncesi eğitimle ilgili bilgi almak istediğini söyledi. Eduardo da çok fazla göçmen, yani mülteci olduğunu Ürdün'de, 2000'de bir tane program yayınlandıklarını ve bu programın iki farklı amacı olduğunu söyledi.
Probably in Turkey also, I presume, because every country in the world in 2015, in September 2015, they all agreed in the what we call the Sustainable Development Goals. I presume you have heard about the Sustainable Development Goals, which basically is all the nations of the world have some objectives that want to achieve in a period of time. So actually for 2030, every single nation in the world has agreed that early childhood development is very important, and at least they want every child in the world to have 1 year of pre-primary school, so early childhood education. So Jordan is very much focused on this. We call it the universalization of early childhood education, or the universalization of kindergarten 2, we call it here. Probably in Turkey you have a different name, but at least 1 year of preschool. We are still not there. Jordan has like 64% of enrollment rate officially of children in preschool, which is actually, I think, quite challenging because we need to get to 100%. But when I see a lot of the countries in the region, it's actually much lower even, which is, heartbreaking.
Ürdün'de en büyük amaçları şu an herkesin, yani ülke genelindeki herkesin ilk öğretime başlamadan önce mutlaka bir ana sınıfına gitmeleri, en az bir yılda olsa mutlaka okul öncesi eğitim almalarını amaçlıyorlarmış. Yani %100'lük bir beklentileri varmış. Fakat şu anda %64'lük bir katılım oranı varmış. Eylül 2015'te işte bu okul öncesi eğitimin sürdürülebilirliğiyle ilgili bir dünya genelinde birçok ülke bu konuyla ilgili bir anlaşmaya varmış ve onların da az önce bahsettiğim gibi en büyük amacı herkesin, her çocuğun, ülke genelindeki bu mülteciler dahil olmak üzere her çocuğun mutlaka ve mutlaka ilk öğretimden önce bir yılda olsa okul öncesi eğitim alabilmeleri.
Yeah, we are trying to reach that objective of universalization before the setup date of 2030. In fact, the government said we are going to do it by 2025, and if we can, we are going to do it even earlier. So I work with UNICEF, as you know, because that's what Dr. Osge presented me. I work with the UNICEF country office here in Jordan, and we are looking at helping the government to increase the access for pre-primary education, but not only that, also to increase the quality there is some interesting, and many of you are going to work on this. The pre-primary education for children is something fantastic for children, but it might not be, because if you are going to put a child in a classroom, in a kindergarten classroom, or in a nursery, if you want, even more dangerous, and that classroom is just a source of toxic stress for a child. It's a classroom that is not going to allow the child to develop socially, physically, cognitively. then you better don't put that kid in that school, right? So it's not only about just the numbers. We put all these children in the school, so we are great. As we know, in the previous global objectives, which were the Millennium Goals, we said we want every child in primary school. But then what it happened is in many countries, the primary schools, especially first, second, third grade, they were full of children. And many of children couldn't have a personalized attention and they didn't learn, right? So you had also results of children that arrived to the third, fourth grade and they didn't know how to write and read, barely write and read their names. So we have to be very careful on not only looking at the numbers, but also looking at the quality of those environments. And I think a lot of the people here, Aise, Irem, Seda, Esgi, I'm sure that you are going to be interacting with those very, very young children. And you will notice that actually children are very difficult and challenging because every single child is a complex human being. And then you need to create an environment that is conducive to development, conducive for learning, conducive for growing to every single one of them. And I think that is a huge challenge because I don't know how many students you have, but probably Turkey needs 10 times more students and many, many more professionals to give that personalized attention to those children, to follow them with their parents, to follow them with their other needs, right? And I said it was very complex. Is the family, is the school, is the hospital, is the community, is the social environments in the neighborhood, how all those kids are going to have continuous stimulation, continuous interactions that are positive to develop those areas. Seda was asking, which activities? Well, depend on the activities because depend on which area of the brain you want to develop. And one of the things is sometimes you want to develop some areas, but every child is different. And maybe you want, and I'm sure this is going to happen to all of us, if you have children or the children you will have one day, it's like, oh, I want my child to be a fantastic, I want my child to be a fantastic human being, right? Empathetic and happy. That's what I want. But lurked in my brain is like, but I would love if my daughter becomes an architect or she becomes a scientist. And then your daughter suddenly becomes, an actress or a painter or the other way around, right? It's just like, I want my daughter to be very artistic. And then your daughter is a mathematician. So the important is not what you want them to be, but to allow them to develop whatever they want to be and creating those environments that give them enough discipline, but at the same time, enough flexibility to become what they really want to be, that potential that brain is lurking, is hiding from you in the early years.
Okay, let me translate. Öncelikle çok güzel bir şeye değindi Eduardo. Dedi ki tamam evet biz %100 herkesin ana sınıfına gitmesini istiyoruz ama dedi burada önemli olan rakamlar değil, rakamlara takılmamamız gerekiyor dedi. Çünkü de hani sadece rakamlara takılıp bütün herkes aynı sınıfa doldurursak, çünkü insan beyni çok kompleks, insan hani genel olarak kompleks bir yaratılış zaten ve onların diğer ihtiyaçlarını karşılayamazsak bu sefer onları okula almak aslında evde bırakmaktan daha kötü sonuçlar doğurabilir dedi. Çünkü de aynı şeyi biz ilköğretim için yaptığımızda mesela bütün çocukları sınıfa doldurduğumuzda ve onları yeteri kadar ilgilenemediğimizde, etkileşime giremediğimizde de onların bireysel farklarını göz önünde bulunduramadığımızda çocuklar 4. sınıfa geldiğinde hala okuma yazmayı bilmiyorlardı dedi. O yüzden hani biraz daha sayılardan ziyade kalite çok önemli. Yani eğer sınıfların, yani bütün %100 herkesin ana sınıflarına gelmesini istiyorsak çocukların mutlaka ve mutlaka kaliteyi ön planda tutmamız gerekiyor dedi. Onun yanı sıra bir başka konuya da şunu ekledi. Hepimizin bir çocuğu var veya ileride çocuklarımız olacak dedi. Herkes tabii çocuğunun, bu bizim ülkede de böyledir. İşte bilim insanı olsun ister ya da işte mimar olsun ister, işte bu böyle fantastik bir çocuk olsun ister. Ama belki de sizin çocuğunuz farklı bir şey olmak isteyecektir dedi. O yüzden hani ona karşı biraz daha iletişim ve etkileşim boyutunu çok güzel tutmamız gerekiyor ve disiplinle onun farklılıklarına saygı duyma bağlantısını ve dengesini çok iyi kurabilmemiz gerekiyor diye ekledi. Aynı hocamızın bir sorusu daha var. How do you work with children who are developmentally behind? What are your studies within scope of?
First of all, I wanted to thank you, Dr. Oski, because it sounds so much better in Turkish than in my Spanish English. So I thank you for that. Well, I mean, that is a fantastic question, and you have to deal with that. Obviously, you are professionals, and you are going to deal a lot with children who are falling behind. I have to say, many times I fall behind in my own work, and you know, sometimes I need a special support for achieving the targets that I create for myself. I don't think children are very different from that. I mean, children are like adults in that sense, and sometimes they fall behind, and you have to give them a special attention to catch up with certain achievements. But I want to distinguish between children with disabilities, either physical or learning disabilities, and children just falling behind. And I think this is a very important distinction, and we have to restrain ourselves for jumping too much into conclusions of learning disabilities or difficulties, learning difficulties for children. This is also a little bit of a different term. Children develop at different speed, and that is you are going to find that within the nurseries or kindergartens or wherever you are working. Children develop at different stages, different speed, and they are at different stages of development, and that is fine. That should be fine. I'm sure that in your university, I presume, maybe not, but probably you learn tables with thresholds of development. By age 2 months, children smile. But age 9 months, they start feeding, alternative feeding. By age 9 months for girls, they start walking. By age 12 months for boys, start walking. By age, and then also for language, you know, phonetics, that's well. There's all these big matrices with a lot of detail on their, you know, at this stage, you have to do this, you have to do that. My personal advice, probably against some of your professors, is that you take those matrices and you put them in the trash bin. Because I don't think you can measure the advancements of development of a child in such a not human way, because we are not matrix. We are not a matrix with, you know, of developmental stages and achievements. We are human beings, and some kid or some child who is very slow between 2 and 3 is very fast when he's 6 or 7, or the other way around. So we're very careful with that. It's personal attention. I mean, more directly answering the question is, you need to have personal attention, right? And you might think or suspect that there is a problem. That problem can be a real medical problem that needs to be diagnosed, and don't try to diagnose when you are not an expert on that. But it can be part of a bigger problem that you can also address, which is neglect and abuse, which is lack of interaction in the house, which is in the home, or which is a problem of bullying in the classroom. And that can be actually sometimes those delays might be a call for help of a kid, of a child who says, yeah, I'm not coloring the books, I'm not doing my letters and my numbers because my head is somewhere else, right? I will say it's personal attention, and probably some kids, some children need more help They are less of independent learners. My daughter is not an independent learner. She needs a lot of guidance. I was a very independent learner. So it really depends very much on the child. But many times you will need to put more or to invest more effort in some children than in others. It's good in many schools they use the shadow teachers. I don't know if you do that in Turkey, or also in nurseries, you have like a primary caretaker and an assistant caretaker. Sometimes that assistant is specific for children with disabilities. But even if you don't have children with disabilities, you have children that need a little bit more of affection, a little bit more of time, a little bit more of guidance.
Bless you. Let me translate it. Aynı hocamız çok güzel bir soru sordu. Bu risk grubundaki çocuklarla ilgili nasıl bir çalışma yürütüyorsunuz ya da hani biraz daha geride kalan çocuklarla ilgili nasıl bir çalışma yürütüyorsunuz diye sordu. Eduardo da diyor ki öncelikle diyor geride kalmıştan hani o da sorunun çok güzel olduğunu söyledi, teşekkür etti. Öncelikle geride kalmıştan kastın ne? Önce ona bakmamız gerekiyor dedi. Yani öğrenmekte mi zorlanıyor? Yoksa sosyal olarak mı bir zorluk çekiyor? Yoksa gerçekten fiziksel bir engeli mi var? Yoksa işte zihinsel bir engeli mi var? Bizim öncelikle bunu bulmamız gerekiyor. Eğer de kastettiğimiz şey öğrenmede biraz geride kalırsa, yani sınıfın gerisinde kalan bir çocuktan bahsediyorsak dedi. Ve biliyorsunuz dedi hani bu hatta vardır, ben de sağlık dersinde bunları öğretmiştim. Böyle chartlar ve matrixler vardır dedi. İşte 3 aylık çocuk işte gülümsemeye başlar. 6 aylık çocuk yeni gıdalara geçmeye başlar. İşte kızlarda 9 aylarda yürümeye başlar. İşte 12 ayda erkeklerde yürümeye başlar. Şimdi diyor siz o matrix'i alın, çöpe atın. Çünkü diyor oradaki her şey diyor sayıdır ve biz diyor hani insanoğluyuz diyor. Biz diyor hani herhangi bir robot tarzı bir şey değiliz diyor. Ve o sayıların aslında hiçbir anlamı yoktur. Çünkü hepimizin farklı bir gelişim süreci var diyor. Örneğin diyor ben diyor kendim problemsiz tek başına öğrenebilen bir bireydim diyor çocukken. Ama diyor şu an bir kızı varmış ve diyor yardıma ihtiyacı var diyor öğrenirken. Çok fazla rehber olunması gerekiyor öğrenirken diyor. Bunun için de diyor ya eğer kastettiğimiz şey sınıfın gerisinde kalan çocuklar için ne yapabileceğimizse diyor işte sunumda belirttiği gibi daha çok ilgi, daha çok böyle etkileşim içerisinde olma, daha çok iletişim içerisinde olmak gerekiyordu diyor. Onun haricinde eğer sizin imkanınız varsa, sınıflarda asistan öğretmenler varsa, işte siz sınıfla ilgilenirken o çocukların mutlaka ekstra bir rehbere ya da işte ekstra bir ilgiye ihtiyacı olduğunda mutlaka onların da bir şekilde desteklenmesi gerektiğini söyledi. I know Turkish sounds a little bit different, right? Başka sorusu olan var mı?
I'm just very jealous because it sounds so beautiful. But that's an amazing question because maybe some of you are interested in particularly this the most, and I love and I encourage you to look at this, which is the children who are going to have more difficulties, the children that have learning disabilities or difficulties, which is a bit different. I'm sure you have some specialties in university to study for this, and I think it's great because we need so much more work with the children that have disabilities. Before, we were just excluding them. Children who learned in a slower way, they were excluded from society. Even children who had real cognitive disabilities, for example, Down syndrome. I don't know if you have ever worked with Down syndrome children, but they used to call them the subnormal children. And when I work a little bit with them, we call them the super children for the affection, because they have an amazing capacity for loving, and they have an incredible capacity for concentration, and so they have different abilities. And I know that this sounds a little bit too politically correct, but more than disabilities, there is a lot of people talking about differently able, right? So the children, maybe they are not very good with maths, but they are very good with arts, or the other way around, right? So we have to be careful with that. But they are great now. More and more, we have better instruments to understand problems like what's they called autism, and to identify problems the earlier the better. One of the 4 messages I gave you in the presentation is the earlier the better. That is especially important for children with disabilities or children that have physical problems or they have, health conditions. The earlier the better. So then you can address them and then they can catch up, which is a little bit the question that your student was asking.
Yine diğer o özel gereksinim olan, yani biraz daha sağlık yönünden problemli olan çocuklara değinmek gerekirse de onları grupların dışında tutmaktansa onlarla ilgili daha çok araştırma yapılması gerektiğini söyledi. Örneğin de Down sendromu çocukların evet belki öğrenmekte güçlükleri olabilir ama örneğin sevmekte çok fazla kapasiteleri olduğunu söyledi veya baktığımızda konsantre olmakta Down sendromu çocukların daha çok kapasiteleri olduğunu söyledi. Yine aynı şekilde sunumda belirttiği gibi ne kadar erken o kadar iyiye daha değinmek istedi. Çünkü özellikle otistik çocuklar için ve yine fiziksel gerilikleri olan çocuklar için de ne kadar erken başlarsanız, yani ne kadar çabuk geliştirmeye başlarsanız erken fark edip bu sorunları çocuk için çok daha iyi olur. Çünkü işte az önce bahsettiği gibi ne kadar erken o kadar iyi diye tekrardan vurguladı Eduardo. One more question. I'm sorry.
Anything you want.
I have a student. He's asking if you use any approach in your early childhood education in Georgia, like a Montessori or like project-based learning.
There are several. Yeah. There are several. Montessori is here. Yeah, Maria Montessori had an amazing. But I think Maria Montessori was it's still very praised, and everybody says it's a great approach. It's very much of a free environment for children, and I think it's one of the methodologies that, especially for early education, I think it's fantastic. But it's not great for all children. So this is also, I think, there is no one methodology that I think is going to be the best methodology. I don't think so. Maybe I am a little bit skeptical. Maybe it's because I believe in the diversity so much of children. It's not uncommon that parents want to change their children from school, and sometimes I think they are right. They know their children, and it's like, my child is not happy in this school. I need to change them. I am always thinking that stability is an important factor, but and so it's good for children to be with their own group for longer, and in the stability of the school, the stability of the home. So I will, in principle, recommend again changes, but sometimes children really need to change because this school that could be fantastic, like Montessori, is not good for my child, right? For example, what I know in Jordan, also from private schools, there's quite interesting, diverse private schools methodologies. I think public schools need to experience much more on kinds of disability, on kinds of methodologies. Is that there are schools that are very much focusing on memory and repetition. For example, the Quranic schools here focus a lot on that, to repeating just verses of the Quran, or just repeating words, repeating letters. I don't think that it can have a lot of good impact. I think memory is important for children. Definitely is a good skill, but there are so many other skills. In some of the places I go, and you see children just repeating things, I find that terribly boring for myself. So if I was a child, I think I will find it also terribly boring for myself. I found, for example, the madrasa approach in Tanzania, just to give you an example. Sorry, I have a little bit of an international experience. That was implemented by the Aga Khan Foundation. I found that fantastic, that you were to a kindergarten and you say organized chaos. And for me, that's beautiful when I see organized chaos. There are children just playing in one corner. There are kids doing little drawing in this corner. There are kids that are doing other things. When you go to a classroom and all the kids raise up and they say, "Good morning, Mr. Eduardo. How are you doing today?" I find that a bit suspicious, because that's not the way children interact. One interesting thing in the kids, and which is one of the biggest challenges for all schools and all methodologies, is children have a very narrow concentration scope, right? Every 10 minutes you have to change activity.
Yeah, you're
It's
right.
exhausting. It's exhausting. But that's the way children are, right? So they are not like us. We want them to do it in a certain way, but they have a different way. They're at a different stage of development, aren't they? I find the organized chaos as one of the best ways of methodologies, and always play-based. That's the Montessori does that, as many other the new curriculum here in Jordan, which has been introduced this year, is all about play-based learning. Colors, number, whatever, but place-based, child-centered, place-based, allowing imagination and freedom of the children while having some environment that is disciplined, that is organized.
Thank you. Mehmet arkadaşımız Ürdün'de hangi yaklaşımı kullandığını sordu. Eğer yaklaşım kullanıyorsanız işte Maria Montessori veya diğerlerinden proje tabanlı eğitim gibi. Eduardo da diyor ki evet Maria Montessori yaklaşımı var burada. Biz onu çok kullanıyoruz. Ama ben kendim çeşitlilik esasında yani sınıfta çeşitlilikle ilgili biraz daha hassas olduğum için herkes için uygun olduğunu düşünmüyorum dedi. Örneğin dedi benim kızım için Montessori okulları uygun değildi diyor. Çünkü diyor hani sınıfta herkese hitap eden şeyi bulmak çok farklı ve zor diyor. Yani sadece Montessori eğitimini alıp da sınıfa koyduğunuz zaman bu bütün çocuklar için yeterli ya da cezbedici olmayabilir dedi. Mesela dedi Ürdün'de Kur'an okulları var dedi ve Kur'an okullarının temeli ezberlemeye ve tekrar etmeye dayalı dedi. Bu bir yetişkin olarak benim için bile çok sıkıcı bir şey dedi. Çünkü dedi her günde de onları tekrar ediyorlar. Sürekli kelimeleri tekrar ediyorlar. Sürekli işte Arapça cümleleri tekrar ediyorlar dedi. Ve bu dedi dediğim gibi yetişkin için bile çok sıkıcıyken yani çocuklar için gerçekten çok sıkıcı bir şey olsa gerek dedi. Yine bir örnek daha verdi. Bu da aslında bizim sınıfımızda çok olan bir şey bence. Bu örneği de Tanzanya'dan verdi. Dedi ki mesela bir sınıfa girdim dedi. Sınıfta herkes ayağa kalktı. İşte merhaba, işte günaydın Bay Eduardo, işte günaydın nasılsınız? Bu bizim sınıflarda var ya, günaydın çocuklar nasılsınız? İşte iyi, siz nasılsınız hocam, oturun falan. Diyor ki bu da diyor yani ortada yanlış bir şeyler olduğunu göstergesi. Çünkü iletişim böyle olmaz. Herkesin etkileşime geçme tarzı bu şekilde değildir. Çocukların herkese işte merhaba Bay Eduardo, merhaba nasılsınız, iyiyiz. Bu iletişim kurmak değildir dedi. Burada da onun için doğru olan şey şu diyor. Ben bir sınıfa girdiğimde sınıfta düzenlenmiş köşeler varsa, örneğin işte bir grup şurada puzzle oynuyorsa, bir grup şurada çizim yapıyorsa, bir grup burada işte örneğin hamur oynuyorsa ya da bu grup burada proje yapıyorsa, işte fen yapıyorsa ya da işte matematikte sayılar yapıyorsa, yani biraz daha planlanmış, organize edilmiş köşeler varsa o sınıf aslında doğru sınıftır diyor okul öncesi eğitim için. Çünkü diyor çeşitliliğe siz hitap etmiş olursunuz. Yani herkes aynı anda örneğin işte matematik yapmaz, herkes aynı anda işte oyun oynamaz, herkes aynı anda işte sayı saymaz. Herkes o anda neyi yapmak istiyorsa, herkese o anda ne hitap ediyorsa o anda onu yapabiliyordur. O sınıf doğru sınıftır diyor. Bunların yanı sıra yine oyun tabanlı eğitimin çok önemli olduğunu söyledi. Ve onun için gerçekten özellikle çocuk erken yaş gruplarında oyun temelli eğitimin çok büyük önem taşıdığını ve çocukların bu şekilde çok daha rahat ve daha keyifli öğrenebildiğinden bahsetti. O yüzden özetlemek gerekirse oyun tabanlı olan ve hazırlanmış, planlanmış köşeleri bulunan sınıflar okul öncesi eğitimde en iyidir dedi Eduardo. Başka sorusu olan var mı? Kaçırdığım herhangi bir soru var mı? Another good question.
I'm sure all of them have been good.
Let me speak in Turkish first. Seden arkadaşımız yaratıcılık ve zekanın bir bağlantısı var mı diye sormuş. Gerçekten güzel soru. Is there any relationship between creativity and being smart?
Oh, wow, that's a very good question.
Very good question.
The short answer is absolutely, absolutely. Which tells us how much smarter children are than we are, right? Because the way their creativity, on the way they can conceive things and colors and relations, are such an out of the box, continuously out of the box experience. Children are continuously creating. In fact, until very recently, we thought that children learned language through imitation and repetition, right? So every morning you say good morning, and the child hears every morning good morning, and then he understands that's the greeting in the morning. But the recent research says otherwise, that children actually create language. They use, and they understand structures, and those structures and words, they played with them to create new language. And as language develops continuously, so does the language that the children create. Creativity is very much linked to intelligence. It's part of who we are as intelligent beings. And I will say the suppression of creativity is the suppression of the growth and development of intelligence. So you know that creativity is, we talked about the creativity on the left side of the brain, and we talked about the cognitive, more superior reflection area of the brain on the frontal cortex of the brain. That is true only partially, because actually what it is more interesting in a healthy brain, and we could go back to the slides, is not that much which area is strongly developed, but which is the connections of all the areas of the brain that are developed. Is it true, for example, if you have a child that is very scared and you suppress creativity, you will have a cerebellum, you will have this back of the area, more like the stress area of the brain that is very well developed and very much disconnection with the rest of the brain. If you have a kid that has a very stimulating environment, you will not only have the creativity area of the brain, which is the left, right? The left side of the brain, I think so. The right side of the brain very developed. You will have the whole brain very developed. You will have a lot of connection, for example, on the top of the brain, which is more the motor skill side of the brain. Because everything needs to be very much interconnected. Play, creativity is the way to develop the whole human being as a very healthy human being, physically, cognitively, socially, emotionally. Yes. I talked a lot, but the answer was yes.
Sizden arkadaşımız yaratıcılıkla zeki olmanın arasında bir bağlantı var mı diye sordu. Eduardo da tabii ki var diye cevap verdi. Sonra da açıklamaya başladı. Örneğin siz sınıfa girdiğinizde işte çocuklar aslında hem yaparak hem de tekrar ederek, taklit ederek aslında öğrenirler dedi. Örneğin sınıfa girersiniz, işte çocuğa günaydın dersiniz. Çocuk sürekli günaydın diye o arada günaydın demeyi öğrenir. İşte bunu pekiştirir. Bunun o zaman söyleneceğini öğrenir dedi. Sonrasında yaratıcı olan çocuklar kendilerine yeni diller geliştirir, yeni fikirler geliştirir ve normalde olması gerekenin dışında düşünürler. Yani farklı düşünürler dedi. Bu da dedi yine sunumda anlattığım gibi hani sadece tek başına yeterli olmuyor dedi. Mesela sizin sunumda da göstermişti işte ön korteksinizi mesela beyniniz daha çok bağlantılarla geliştiriyor dedi. Ama arkadaki kısımda da daha çok stres zamanında çok fazla oralarda bağlantılar hızlanıyor dedi. Eğer siz sol taraftaki yaratıcılığınızı geliştirmek istiyorsanız dedi sadece o sol kısmı geliştirmekle kalmayacaksınız. Diğer kısımlarını da geliştirmeniz gerekiyor ki biz tam anlamıyla bir zekadan bahsedelim dedi. Çünkü resimlerde de gördüğünüz gibi bağlantılar her yerde olması gerekiyor. Yani örneğin işte stres olan kısım sadece burası kırmızıysa ve diğer taraflarda işte bağlantılar yoksa veya sadece ön tarafta bağlantı varsa diğer taraflarda yoksa o bir işe maalesef yaramıyor. Eğer siz sol tarafta yani sol lobunuzdaki yaratıcılığı geliştirmek istiyorsanız diğer kısımlardaki o bağlantıları da güçlendirmeniz gerekiyor dedi ki böylelikle sizin tam anlamıyla zeki olduğunuzdan bahsedebilelim. Ayşe'nin soruları varmış. Hemen onlara bakalım.
Yes, and listen to that imagination and look at those creativity of the children, because through the stories, through the paintings, through what you are going to see in the plays, you are going to learn a new world, the world of the child, and you will learn amazing things, including potentially problems also. So don't inhibit ever the creativity of children, because it will gives you a door to the world of that child.
Aha. Çocukların yaratıcılığını asla arka plana atmayın. Sanatla ilgili, işte müzikle ilgili, resim yapmayla ilgili mutlaka ona sürekli fırsatlar verin. Çünkü o kapı çocuğu diğer başta problem çözme olmak üzere birçok anlamda geliştirecektir diye ekledi Eduardo. Okay, so what about what was it? Intangible things in like early years to teach children between from birth to age.
Sorry, I didn't.
Intangible things.
Yeah, intangible things like what? Give me an example.
Let me think. Like being a person in a community, it's a kind of like intangible thing.
Oh, imaginary things.
Not imaginary.
No, imaginary. Okay.
Let me think.
Who's asking the question? He's putting me on a difficult situation.
So I mean, like like there is a Piaget stage.
There is a what? Sorry.
Piaget stage. Piaget.
I don't know what Piaget is.
Piaget, it's a scientist.
Okay. Sorry. Yes. Go ahead.
Piaget stage. So he says like there's a stage of the child, and the intangible stage starts like from 11 years old. And Ayşe is asking, how can we develop, like, because like the brain is has so many connectivity during the 2 to 3. So she's asking how she can improve the intangible things in those time.
Well, I think it's exactly the same thing. Like, I mean, this is like the question of the type of activities that you need to have with the child, right? I mean, I would say, and this is again on the cheesy, the key. I think I said the cheesy when I was starting talking about the plasticity of the brain and those moments where there is this maximum connectivity. I think you need to think that a child, when he's born and he has all this potential, knows very little. There is not that much connection in the brain because there has been so little exposure. But when you start exposing the child through affection to things that are positive, then it's exciting to learn, right? So the interesting part of those 3 first years for me is that this, what's the word? So it's not only that it's increasing a lot, that connectivity in the brain, but the interesting thing is that it's increasing exponentially, right? So there is no one activity that is going to increase that exponentiality of the synaptical connectivity, but it's rather a mix of different things around the child. The main element is affection. The main element is affection. Is affection. You know that touching is very important, and it stimulates actually the nerves terminations in the body. But if you touch someone with affection, it's a positive stimulation for the child that is going to multiply the connectivity between the nerves. If you hit a child, that's also touching, but it has actually the opposite impression in the brain. It stimulates the different areas of the brain that are more linked to stress, right? Cortisol, adrenaline. I mean, adrenaline can have a very positive, and cortisol also has a very important role to play in a child. A child should have higher levels of cortisol early in the morning and very low levels of cortisol in the evening, so she goes to sleep, right? So these chemical interactions in the body that are going to make possible this multiplying effect of connectivities have to be possible through the different elements that you are going to surround the child with: affection, contact, music, dance, movement, a lot of words. And I will say that I think one of the elements that are the most important between 0 to 3 is communication.
Mhm.
is communication. Maybe that's probably the one element with affection that is. There is a big research on the numbers of. I think I told you this, Dr. Oske, once in our conversation. Is called the 3 million words experiment. Children who were in households whose parents had low levels of education and high levels of poverty versus households where parents had high levels of education and middle class, so certain comfortably economically. And the interesting part of that was that the children in those households, the ones in the poorer households, have heard, by the age of 3, have heard less than 3 million words less than the children in the other households. So that means that when you are 3, there is a gap on stimulation that is huge, because there is a gap on communication that those children couldn't benefit from.
Mhm. Yeah.
Let's stop there, because otherwise it's going to be too much for you.
Yeah, thank you. Aşçı arkadaşımız soyut kısımların, yani 2 ile 3 yaş arasında, evet, Eduardo'nun da söylediği gibi o kısımlar çok fazla önemli ve bağlantıların çok fazla olduğu bir dönem. Ayşe arkadaşımız diyor ki hani soyut işlemler döneminde değiller ama biz bu konuyla ilgili neler yapabiliriz diye sordu Eduardo'ya. Eduardo da diyor ki aslında yapacağımız şeyler hani şimdiye kadar anlattıklarımın çok bir farklılık göstermiyor. Hani ne kadar çok sevgi gösterirsek, işte ne kadar çok ilgilenirsek, ne kadar çok iletişim kurarsak o kadar faydalı olacaktır diyor. Mesela yapılan bir çalışmadan bahsetti. Çok büyük bir kitleyle yapılan bir çalışma. Bir tarafta maddi durumu ve sosyoekonomik statüsü çok iyi olmayan ailelerin çocuklarıyla, bir tarafta da maddi durumu iyi olan, hani işleri ve ekonomik şartları iyi olan ailelerin çocukları karşılaştırılmış. Ve maddi durumu kötü olan ailedekiler hem içinde buldukları stres durumları hem de işte dışarıda iş üzerinde, işte belki birden fazla işte çalıştıkları için, belki de buna benzer sebeplerden dolayı da yaşadıkları streslerden veya çok kardeşli olmaklardan dolayı çocuklarıyla çok daha az vakit geçirip, daha az sevgi gösterip, daha az iletişime geçtikleri, etkileşimde olduklarını gözlemlemiş. Bir tarafta da o maddi durumu iyi olan, yani sosyoekonomik statüsü iyi olan ailelerin çocuklarıyla çok daha fazla zaman geçirip çok daha fazla sevgilerini gösterdiklerini, etkileşim içerisinde olduğunu ve iletişimlerin çok daha güçlü olduğunu göstermişler. 3 yaşına geldiklerinde bu çocukları kıyasladığında arada 3 milyon tane kelime farkı olduğunu, yani çok fazla bir uçurum olduğunu göstermiş. Eduardo da diyor ki yani bu uçurumun tek sebebi, aslında o şartlara kadar biliyorsunuz hani bunların en büyük sebebi ilgi, alaka, sevgi ve bunu göstermek olduğu için bu aradaki açılan uçurumun tek sebebi sizin gösterdiğiniz sevgi ve kurduğunuz iletişim ve etkileşim. Bu arayı açmamak için yapabileceğiniz en güzel şey, işte sunumun başından da beri söylediğim gibi, ne kadar çok iletişim kurarsanız, ne kadar çok sevdiğinizi gösterirseniz, ne kadar çok çocuklara dokunur, iletişim kurar, onların ihtiyaçlarını dinlerseniz o kadar çok onların gelişimine faydalı olacaktır dedi. Umarım bir şey kaçırmamışımdır. Bugün özel bir gün olduğu için sevgililer günü çok fazla sizi de tutmak istemiyorum. Son soruyu da soralım. Eduardo, since it's a special day, I don't want to hold you too much. I want to ask one more question. It's going to be the last question. Is there any relationship between gender and intelligence?
Gender. I mean, I was reading that there in a gender or sexuality and it's gender. That's
It's
the
gender,
question.
yeah.
Oh, it's gender. I would say absolutely women are more intelligent than men. There is no doubt about it.
Children.
But in children, so there is a different development, and I'm sure you have seen a lot of studies on boys and girls develop differently. But and so you know that usually girls are able to walk or talk earlier than boys. And that is going to continue this gender gap continues during the whole development of the human being. In fact, adolescence, which is basically a second vague on development of a lot of brain hormonal alteration and definitely chemical shaping of the body. They call it the second window of opportunity for development. last in men much longer than in women. So basically, I will say from the brain development point of view, not from the legal point of view or the social interactions, because sometimes we talk a lot about things that or we have understanding of concepts that are actually disconnected from the real development of the human beings. So adolescence for women usually ends, the adolescence period usually ends in early 20s. 21, 22, 23, depending. I don't know you or your students, or everybody is different. I'm not saying maybe if you open a brain, maybe someone, a girl, this woman was totally developed by 20, or this one was developed at 25. But you know, early 20s. In men, is usually like late 20s. So I will. It's like. You know, that's why someone asked me, is like, when is good to have children? It's like, I would say when you have passed your adolescence, because then your brain is much more stable and you can actually focus on something which is probably the most difficult task on earth, which is being a parent. And it requires a lot of efforts, emotionally, intellectually, physically. So that's children of, you know, younger of adolescents, of very young parents, have higher risk of neglect and abuse. But it's not a surprise, because we don't mature until quite late in life, and men takes longer than women. That said, take it with a pinch of salt. There are boys who can develop very fast, girls who can develop very slow.
Okay, thank you. Yine zeka ile cinsiyet arasında bir fark var mı diye sordum. Eduardo dedi ki evet var. Bence kadınlar daha zeki. Bilmiyorum gerçekten böyle mi düşünüyor, yoksa biz böyle şu anda kadın popülasyonu şu an çok fazla, o yüzden bilemiyorum, ama şunu öyle söyledi. Biliyorsunuz kız çocukları erkek çocuklarından çok daha erken, 9 aylık gibi, az önce bahsettiğim gibi 9 aylıkken işte konuşup yürümeye başlıyor. Erkekler biraz daha geç yürüyüp başlıyor. Sonrasında ergenlik döneminde de aynı şekilde devam ediyor diyor. Ergenliğe girdikten sonra ergenlik süreci örneğin kadınlarda 20'lerin başında biterken işte erkeklerde bu biraz daha 20'lerin ortasını, hatta biraz daha üstünü bulabiliyor diyor. Haliyle diyor bu süre uzun sürdüğü için, yani gelişim süreci biraz daha uzun sürdüğü için biraz daha aradaki farkı kapatmak zaman alabiliyor diyor. Özellikle mesela bana sorduklarında çocuk yapmak için en uygun ne zamandır diye. Bu mesela kadınlarla erkekler arasında mutlaka farklılık gösteren bir şey diyor. Hani erken yaşta anne ve baba oldukları zaman onları, çocukları ihmal etme ve biraz daha bu konuda istismar etmeleri daha çok sık karşılaşılan bir şey olduğu için diyor, ben kendilerini tamamlamadan çocuk sahibi olmalarını doğru bulmuyorum diye söyledi Eduardo. I have a question. This is my question.
Of course.
Look at the brains. For example, like 3 age, a female and male brain.
Yeah.
Baby boy or baby girl. Can we see differences between the like synapse connectivity?
Yes, you can. And actually, there is an interesting thing, because the brain, the female brain is a little bit smaller than the male brain.
Oh, really?
But yeah, it is. There is a little bit of different on the weight of the brain. I mean, it's not surprising. Usually men are bigger. But that's not an important thing on the brain. The Neanderthals had bigger brains than the Homo sapiens. The difference is, the important thing is not that much the size, but is the connectivity of the brain. And what it seems is like the female brain is a bit more connected. So I will say you can have different sizes of brain, but in terms of intelligence as such, it's basically undistinguishable which brain will be smarter and
Yeah.
which one wouldn't.
But for the connectivity, can we say like female or girls has like
there are some differences. There are some differences on the structure of the brain. As I said, the female brain is slightly smaller, but usually the connected areas can be seen a little bit different. But I would say, I mean, at the end of the day, be very careful with this gender gap issues, because the reality is, I mean, you can see anything you want in the brain, but what we know is that we can't say that different speed in development is going to be translated into someone being smarter or not smarter. My impression in terms of and I think it's a fascinating area of study, but particularly for your students and for the interaction with the children, the gender is an important part, but more importantly is the individual personality of the child you are dealing with.
Yeah. Çocukların bu az önce gördüğümüz o
Just a second, you can translate that.
Beyindeki bu bağlantılarla ilgili bir soru sordum. Dedim ki hani kız çocuklarıyla erkek çocukların beyinlerine baktığımızda bu bağlantılarla ilgili herhangi bir fark görebilir miyiz? Hani tamam, gelişimlerini kızlar daha önce tamamlıyor ama o da dedi ki öncelikle erkeklerin beyinleri kadınların beyinlerinden daha büyüktür ve bu şaşılacak bir şey değildir aslında. Çünkü fiziksel olarak erkekler kadınlara göre hani ortalamayı gördüğünüzde daha fazladır ama çocukların beyinlerine de baktığımızda erkek çocukların beyinleri kız çocukların beyinlerinden biraz daha hacim olarak büyük olduğunu söyledi. Ama bu bağlantılara baktığımızda da tam tersi, kız çocukların beyindeki bağlantılarının daha sık bağlandığından bahsetti. Ama şunu da söylemeden geçemeyeceğim dedi. Hani bu işte daha zeki olduğunun göstergesi değil. Yani o bağlantıların daha sık olması daha zeki olduğunun göstergesi değildir dedi. Burada önemli olan bizim her çocuğun, her bireyin farklı bir özelliğe sahip olduğunu bilmemiz ve bunu göz önünde bulundurmamız gerekiyor. Hani sadece cinsiyete bakarak ya da sadece o bağlantılara bakarak hani çok zekidir ya da az zekidir dememiz mümkün değil dedi. Kapatmadan önce sormak istediğiniz herhangi bir soru var mı arkadaşlar? Eğer yoksa bu arada tekrar resim alabilir miyiz? Herkesten katılmak ister misiniz? Her hafta olduğu gibi. Eduardo, is it okay for you to take a picture before we end our conversation?
Oh my God, I should have done my hair. Yeah, of course, no problem. Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you.
And
Eduardo, by the way, I would like to thank you again for your time and effort.
my pleasure. It's me. I'm super thankful to you all for your interest on this, and Dr. Osge, you were super kind to reach out to me, and